Ladies and gentlemen, we're in the Your Little Castle show. A friend of mine here who is a big Cardinal fan, we talked about that a little bit. We say if you're in St. Louis, it's a good idea to be a Cardinal fan, I think,
Right.
because there's a lot of people who love the Cardinals. You will find mutual interests if you can. We're all here to make friends and be nice to people and get to know everybody and then make a living too, right?
Yeah, well, St. Louis is a baseball town, and definitely to make a living. Got to pay for those tickets.
Got to pay for those tickets. You meet so many people at the sporting games, especially the Cardinals. You were familiar with the Cardinal Cowboy before this all started. You asked your mom, and she said, "Yes, I've seen him on TV." Is that what she said?
Yeah. Oh, it says people know you. It says.
And I appreciate you checking up. See, hey, I think I'm going to be a guest on his show. Thank you for being honest with me. And then if she just said, no, he's a weirdo, then I said, oh, let's not talk about that.
He says, yeah, no, we wouldn't bring that up.
But I do have fun, and some people think I'm fun. Let's just say some people think I am a lot of fun. I was in a coma, lucky to survive, lucky to be here. One thing I had that my dad took good note on was insurance. If you don't have the right insurance, you could be in a lot of trouble. People think it's some outrageously expensive thing that they just can't afford if they don't know about it.
Exactly.
How often is that the case? You run into that a little bit?
All the time. Every day. People put it out of their own reach just by not doing their homework.
Ladies and gentlemen, independent broker, life and health specialist, Terrell Lane. You're an independent broker.
Independent.
It seems like the world has gone that way now. Why is that? Because more opportunity to help people for what they need.
Yeah, it's a industry where if you only have one company or one product, you're not as resourceful to your clients as being able to show them and put multiple products in front of them at one time.
Well, yeah, because there's not just one cookie cutter thing for anybody.
No, everyone's situation is different. And the craziest thing in my business, especially on the healthcare side, is to go into a house with a husband and wife, and I tell the husband to take one Medicare plan and the wife to take a different one. And they're like, well, we always do it together, And I'm like, well, it's Medicare. It's an individual policy. He takes this drug, you don't. Or he has this situation, or you don't. And so it's really different for people to get that type of advice.
Makes sense. I mean, I give a little bit of my background because I share everything I can. That's just my strategy for life. It's worked out well. My parents are teachers or educators, college admissions counselor. My dad's sister's a teacher. I'm the one that got left out. My mom says, Carter, you're really teaching people from a different, marketing things because, you got to get the word out. If you don't, my dad made a joke a long time ago. I won't say the specifics, but it's the first profession in the history of the world was marketing, actually, because it doesn't matter what it was. Somebody had to tell everybody, here's what I'm doing. So please use my services if you need help. And that's where you need an expert. How many different certifications and all that? You must have, how long have you been doing this now?
Well, I'm going into my 12th year.
Okay.
And so I have licenses in Missouri, Illinois, Arkansas, different states, a few different states. And I have to do my continuing education
right.
and keep up with all my products and get certified for Medicare because I do Medicare. And so it's a lot to keep up with, but it's beneficial to me because I'm able to stay in front of the trends, know what's happening, and be able to point my clients in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about knowledge, data, information. That's why my mom says, Carter, I enjoy my career. She just celebrated 60 years, 20 years in retirement. She's kept teaching. They just did a thing on the front page of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. She's told me how that came about. She says, I found out somebody that told somebody who knew somebody who told somebody. Isn't that how the world works?
That is exactly how the world works.
They worked at the Post-Dispatch, and so they decided to write an article. But in St. Louis, you better be really good to whoever you're working with because word travels quickly if you're not doing good for people.
I always joke that there's 2 degrees of separation in St. Louis because we're just a big, small town. And so reputation is very important. And also, it's very easy to get referred if you're doing a good job because people talk.
That is the truth. And social media and everything that's come together, that's why I like highlighting leaders that I get to know. I think Dawn had met you at an event somewhere.
I talked to her man, a year ago or so. Just casual conversation out. We were at a fair doing some things. I think it was with the Chamber of Commerce, if I'm not mistaken. But,
Okay.
It's just one of those things where being in the community, you bump into people, you find resources, you put a plan together that you didn't know was going to be a plan because, it happens organically. And that's the best part about what I like to do, which is move throughout the town. I'm all over St. Louis because that's how you run into people. And she was like, we'll try to invite you on the show sometime. And okay. And then one day she calls and she's like, hey, but it's really nice to have made that connection.
Well, that's how it works in the business world in general. Word of mouth. They call that WOM. Word of mouth. What's your most efficient method for marketing? Well, number one, have a good reputation. Help people. Do things to make the world a better place. That will travel far. And then people will talk about it. Word of mouth. And then if you happen to be doing something good that you're making sure people are getting taken care of correctly, and you're doing the broker thing. I'm getting off my normal list of questions here. I ran right over here. We got the vertical TV now over here, but we'll come back to the question I want to get back to. But is that the method now? I mean, brokers. I for so long, it used to be they were captive agents. I did a little insurance thing for a minute. I thought I knew Anheuser-Busch was going to get bought out about a year before everybody else did. And a buddy of mine points at his screen and he goes, see how much I made last month? And I'm like, that's a little more than I did. I was an IT guy managing corporate email systems for the largest brewing company in the world. I was doing pretty well. But I saw that and I'm like, okay. And they had a great reputation for helping people too. And they said, oh, here's the kinds of things. They were founded on staying away from one kind of insurance that people say you shouldn't get into. You might have heard of this whole discussion. But anyway, I got into it. I realized it is an awesome way to help people. And I got stuck with, we couldn't do mortgages because the whole collapse of 2008. Went back to the IT world and marketing and all that stuff. But I got a good handle on insurance. I'm like, this is more important than most people realize. This can destroy a family if you don't have the right kind of insurance. Is that true?
Yeah, it's I was just speaking to at an event earlier, and I kind of equate it to your health care in the sense that you have a primary care doctor, you have checkups, you kind of look in on it. With insurance, for some reason, people go years, sometimes decades, without reviewing their policy or meeting with someone to go over their strategy. And oftentimes you might leave yourself exposed. And unfortunately, I'm in the business of I have to protect you from the worst case scenario, even though in your mind everything is going to turn out wonderful. But insurance is there in case it doesn't, or make sure you have some extra protection.
Yeah, I mean, what are some of the situations that people just don't realize? Again, getting off into a tangent. I want to answer that question because I'll forget it about. It's not on my list. The other one's on my list, so I'll remember that one. But what are the things that most people don't realize they're at risk for because they just didn't sit down with somebody to say, hey, by the way, you didn't have this, and so this is going to happen. I can tell you about the accident I was in. Sadly, I won't talk specifics with names, but the gentleman who was driving our car, they had a limited policy. It was like all he had was uninsured. All they had to cover to make sure if something happened that the car got replaced and the person that they might have injured got hurt. Right. But they didn't have a bunch of coverage on themselves, and it was a tragic situation. And I had better coverage that my dad had put on me for whatever reason, but knew about the situation, whatever. And all of a sudden, I'm walking out with a check for a decent amount, not a whole lot considering what I've seen some of these checks come to people for, and they broke their arm. I was in a coma. But had I not had that proper insurance, life would have been like a horrible event and nothing to bounce back. The guy who hit us had 5 DWIs before it happened. And so underinsured, et cetera, but how does that apply to health and life, especially, and what do you see people make mistakes with?
Well, some of the biggest mistakes are people being underinsured unknowingly. One of the most common is the accidental death policy that they offer at some institutions like banks and different things, and they're really inexpensive, but they're only good if you die in an accident. And one of the saddest stories, actually, I had a client who called me, her neighbor, who told her family she had a $25,000 policy for life insurance to bury her. She was 80-something years old. She passed away, and her son found out that this policy that mom had all these years was an accidental death policy, which wouldn't pay anything for her dying of natural causes. And in that moment, they called me, and I had to explain to them what the policy was, but it was kind of heartbreaking because she felt like she was doing the right thing. She had insurance, she just didn't have the right type of insurance, and she didn't understand what it was that she had, thus the mistake was made, and her family got nothing.
Gosh, I'm thinking of a bunch of situations now. Another friend of mine And when I was working for this other company, I won't mention and whatever, this is about your business, but this other company, great stuff. And I was doing this on the side because some people can do it on the side. I wouldn't advocate that because it's hard to be an expert when you're doing it on the side. You want the expert who does it full time. And we were learning, and I was coming up, and a lot of people, you got to get your feet wet everywhere, right?
Right.
Somewhere, but getting into it. Anyway, I'm a pretty avid learner, and I go after and dig into things and found all the differences and all that. But anyway, I set a buddy of mine up, and then somebody came back in after me and said, why don't you cancel that and get into this other kind of policy? And then something happened to him, and he passed, and the policy that I put in place, which would have been like a $200,000, was gone. How often does that kind of situation come about? You're like, somebody just thought they were trying to help you, or they're maybe just trying to get a sale.
And that's the part about being a broker that I have to explain to people, because it's like other things. If you don't know the big plan, the strategy, and you just come in and you get a part of the business, as a broker, I can write all these different products versus someone who's just trying to sell you something. So I tell people I don't like sales, I like clients. And my services are free. The only thing that I ask for in return is loyalty, because that keeps you from being in the situation, and it happens all the time, where someone gives you part of the story, or you answer the phone and some guy from the other side of the country talks you into doing something that's not beneficial to your overall strategy because they're looking at an isolated part of. And sometimes, you know what, people forget why they're doing what they're doing. So I'll have people that it's like we come up with a plan, and then someone, either a relative or another business entity, contacts them, and they're like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. But then I'll call, and I'm like, oh, do you realize we were doing this for this reason? Like, oh, I forgot. Because it's insurance. No one likes insurance. No one likes reading their policies. But when you have a cohesive strategy, it's very important to keep as many hands out of the pot as possible. So you don't want to get too many hands in the pot because you lose your way in terms of strategy.
Well, yeah. I mean, of course, somebody's going to mess up the plan because they didn't realize this other rider. I guess it gets complicated with all stuff. I know some of the terminology. It's been a while since. It was 2008, 9, 10. And now we're 2025, so things change. That's right. We always talk about it on the show here, right? Get an expert, like somebody knows what they're doing. 12 years doing this. What led you here? When did you decide, this is the path? And I know you talked a little, pregame prep, we talked a little bit about in the auto world a little bit.
So, yeah, I've kind of grown up in insurance. I went to school for business, but I have a master's in insurance. They don't pass those out, but I'll claim it anyway. But I started out as a theft investigator, claims adjuster for one of the larger property casualty companies. And I kind of got tired of arguing with lawyers all day. Right. And different people. It was very adversarial. So I wanted to really help people. And for me, I had a really interesting relationship with insurance because I had to assist my grandmother with her insurance. And I started to learn at that point with Medicare specifically how complicated it was. So here I was, I worked for a Fortune 500 company. They give us 3 options during open enrollment. I'd circle the one in the middle, turn the paper back in. That was my enrollment period. But with Medicare and the A and the B and the D's and the C's, I got lost in it, and I was like, well, I'm a pretty smart guy, and if I don't understand this, how do they expect for seniors to understand this? And that was kind of the beginning. Long story short, I got a call from a friend who was working at a brokerage firm who's like, hey, I think you'll be really good at this. And I went to go and interview with the CEO of this firm, and he's like, how do you think you'll be working with seniors? I said, well, my grandma's 102 and she's my best friend, so I think I'll be okay. And he's like, you know what? I've heard a lot of answers in interviews. I've never heard that one. And that was kind of the beginning of me getting into the insurance sales side of things and being a broker. And then once I learned what being a broker really was, which is representing your clients and not a company, things really started to take off for me.
Well, and that's it. I mean, ultimately, what we're all looking for is somebody who just actually kind of cares, right? If you care, tell me if you've heard this one. I don't care how much you know until I know how much you care.
Yes.
And because if you don't really care about who you're working with and you don't care what their outcome might be, you're just worried about a paycheck, that's going to come out in what you're trying to sell because you're not going to sell the right thing. You're not going to, selling, okay? Selling means like the transfer of one thing to another or somebody buying something. Selling is not a bad thing. Everybody has to buy something every day that they need to make it on this little planet. But you better give the proper, we like to call ourselves consultants, right? Advisors, experts, because you're helping people to make a decision for something that's important for their well-being on this planet. right?
Yeah, no, and it's really fun. Yesterday, I actually had a client who was a veteran widow, so she has VA benefits. And long story, she called and she wanted me to sell her a dental plan. And so I went into her house. She wanted a dental plan. I could have sold her a dental policy because I do dental insurance as well. But I looked over her package of her insurance and I realized that because she has VA benefits, she could be in a special Medicare plan that included $2,500 in dental. And it wouldn't cost her a thing. And it actually, she got $130 back on her Social Security every month by being in this plan. So she looked at me like, this can't be real. I basically called you over to spend money, and you're telling me you're going to give me what I needed and give me back $130 a month in my budget. And so to have those moments where people feel like they were seen, they were heard, but even more so, they were able to get a better outcome for their household that they didn't even know existed before I walked through the door. And that's the part about my job that I love.
Absolutely. I mean, as I thought about it, and you and I were talking pregame a little bit, and I said, man, I was in that path, and I won't say the name, but I know a gentleman who has a super nice house and a big boat, and that's nice, but he's done something well to take care of people. And if you've done well, that might be because you have actually taken care of people. A lot of people do not take advantage of other people to get their wealth. Most people, obviously, because you can't stay in business long doing that, right?
Not in this city. I always joke with my clients that I have to walk around St. Louis. So I want to be able to see my client at Schnucks, and they're like, oh, there's my broker. Not, hey, there's that lying insurance guy who told me a bunch of stuff that wasn't true. So it's very important that you maintain your reputation. And also, I do really well with referrals, because when people trust you, they trust you to work with their families and friends, and it becomes something that just kind of builds on itself.
Well, as we continue to work on this new thing called the interwebs, I had a couple things I want to share with Terrell to say, hey, I got some ideas for you, some things I'd like to share about this. Got a great looking little website up here now. Looks pretty cool.
Yeah.
And can I tell everybody I helped make some reference for that?
Yeah.
And so I know a lot of brokers out there. Now I'm like, man, we need to help a lot of the insurance guys, because this is the case. Big companies, and they give you their corporate site, but if every person that was a rep had their own individual site, now they get to really share who they are. And so if you will, take what we put together here for you. I put this together for Terrell, and because he's a good dude. I mean, I said, man, I'm going to help you out with that. We do web development. It took me like an hour to make this website look good, because don't spend $6,000. These people who sell these things are crazy. But get something that gets very good information out there for people, and take this video, this interview, and put it on the front of your website. Would you think that might be something that would help other people understand? That's the idea here, everybody. And I get caught up with, please just do certain basic things, because you're a good person. You know what you're talking about. People need to know about you. And that's why we do the show. And we want people to know about those people who are making a difference, who are helping people, who do a good job, and aren't looking to make $10 million off one sale to take advantage of somebody. They want to just consistently do good work, and that adds up over time.
Definitely. Anything worth having is worth working hard for. And so it's a big thing for me to put the footwork out in the community, give back when I can, and then really leverage partnerships. So I got some really cool opportunities coming up with some of the different businesses in town. I'm actually doing something with Operation Food Search right now, sponsoring some of their stops for their indoor food market. And I got a huge senior series coming up with Beyond Housing, which starts in April. And just being able to bring resources to communities, give people knowledge, because it's really funny, because as a sales guy, most sales guys don't want their clients to know too much, because it's easy to sell them something that they don't need or something that's not good for them, versus my approach, which is I want you to understand what you have. I want you to have the knowledge to protect yourself and to be a good client. And a good client is a client that's loyal and understands what they're doing. So that's my whole premise. I like to educate people on their options.
Take note on that one, everybody. And gosh, I deal with that all the time. And I'm working with people. I'm in the marketing space, and I start talking about things and giving them details. And I start explaining things like, no marketing person's ever told me that. And I'm like, yeah, because they don't want you to know the truth. If you'd realized what they were doing, you wouldn't have paid for it, and you wouldn't be 2 years later or 4 months later or 6 years later without any results based on strategies that just don't work. Similar thing with insurance. I mean, these clients that don't understand they got sold something that is no good for them, but it made a real good commission for whoever it was that sold it to them.
Well, and it's always, why does your broker like you? He says, I like to like my
I'm
clients.
putting myself on camera
good.
with that one. That made me laugh. Why did? Yeah, because he's making lots of money off you.
But I'm one of the few agents. I'm a really bad sales guy. I'll admit that in public, because I'll be the agent like, you have enough of this. You don't need it anymore. And most guys will not tell you to stop buying. I have one lady who loves life insurance, and I swear she calls me. She's like, I need a new policy, and I'm like, do you really? But if that's what you want, I'll sell it to you. But that's not my intention. Is to have you overinsured. No one wants to be insurance poor. And that was one of the statements that my grandpa would say, you don't want to be insurance poor, and but it's a real thing because you want to make sure you're covering yourself, but putting the money in the right buckets so that you can protect yourself, your family, and whatever goals you have. And everyone has different goals.
There it is, everybody. So the goals. So tell me the equation, as I recall, and tell me where I get this wrong, but or maybe I'm close, but not my thing. You're an expert. I'm bringing out. That's why I bring the experts on here. Tell me, bottom line is how many. If you have a house, and you have income, and if the house needed to be paid by the person who had the income, or a couple of people had the income, then you need to essentially have a policy that covers at least that much plus other expenses and car maybe. But you're saying some people will get a $10 million policy when they have $2 million worth of assets.
Yeah, so
exposure.
it's making sure that it meets the moment in terms of what it is you're trying to do. So you'll have people who want the house paid off if something happens to them, but they don't get enough, right? And then you have people who want this thing done, but they have way too much in that one particular bucket. So it's really understanding, okay, if it's going to be a term situation, hey, I'll have the house paid off in 20 more years. For the next 20 years, I need this level of policy. And one thing that I teach my clients is there's nothing wrong with stacking policies, meaning having multiple policies that do different things based on your stage in life. So if I get a little older, the kids are all grown, I don't really need the huge policy now. I can maybe let some things fall off because now I'm in a retirement setting. I don't have as much income coming in because I'm retired. I'm on a fixed income, but I also don't need the $2 million policy anymore. I can be okay with a $500,000 policy just because my house is paid off, my investments are working, my 401k is working for me. I have different things going on that doesn't require that level of support because now my adult children have their own policies. And I've hopefully passed on to them the importance of having policies, because one of the other things I tell my older clients is to talk to your kids. The best time to buy insurance is when you're young,
Yeah, that's for sure too. I think I have one policy that lapsed, and it was a big policy that when I was younger was like $30 a month. Term. Do you talk to people about the different types of insurance with regard to, because you're talking life insurance a lot of times, but variable life, whole life, term life. What is it that, what kind of a strategy do you put together? I guess it's custom for everybody. So.
Everyone gets their own custom plan, but the first thing before we do the plan, we do the knowledge. Because you can't do something without understanding what it is that you're doing successfully. So knowing the difference between a term policy and a whole life policy, one of the biggest things I hear from people is, well, which one's the best? There's no such thing as that. Or this one's better than that. That's not true. It's more so you want to know what it's doing, right? So if it's covering the basis for you and serving a purpose, it's the best policy for your situation at that time. But it's not a cookie cutter thing. If anyone's giving you advice like, hey, I've gotten this thing figured out and everyone needs to do this, run away, because everyone's situation is different.
Well said there, and that's what we talk about. We're barely through the questions I normally go through, but the insurance thing, I just personally have dealt with it in a couple of huge parts of my life that impacted dramatically. If you know my story, going into a coma, and a driver of our car, and everybody that gets affected by that, and you just don't realize what you're getting into because you didn't take an extra 15 minutes while you met with somebody. Maybe you talked to them, maybe it's over the phone, but man, it's worth an hour of your life to get these things in place. Maybe 2 hours, maybe 6 hours if it took that long, depending on what kind of situation. If you're older and you got a lot of assets, or you got a lot of kids or family or whatever, how much time do people put into this, and how much?
It really depends. Sometimes I'll have multiple meetings with people because insurance can be boring. I do this all day, so I enjoy it. But for the average person, it's a lot. So sometimes we might break meetings up and, do an hour here or 2 hours here. It really depends on the person and their personality. I have some clients who come with a whole bunch of research. They're ready to go, and they want to get in it with me. And they're like, hey, let's look at all this stuff, and I got all my policies. And other people are like, oh, great, the insurance guy's coming. And it's like, oh, but then I like to enjoy people. So I like to have fun. I like for people to feel like, hey, I'm the regular person. I treat everyone like family. I don't have a sales pitch. I haven't for years. Like, there is no sales pitch because I have conversations. And based on the conversation that I have with my clients, I can figure out what their needs are. I can figure out where, if any, places we can make alterations. But I've also learned in the business that when people trust you, it goes very far. So sometimes it's walking away and saying, look, you're in the best situation for what you're trying to accomplish. I'm not going to sell you anything. But that person will send me to their friends and family because at that point they trust me.
The number one most important thing any one of us can have, I believe, is that trust, that honest approach. And that's where I have some difficult situations with some of my clients. We're talking business stuff usually, but it's like some of them don't want to hear it. They're like, I don't know what you're making my head hurt. And I'm like, well, you better get this together because you're not going to be able to pay your bills if you don't do this right. That's pretty dramatic. You need to pay your bills. All that's important. You got to put food on the table. When you're talking about insurance, though, it's more than that. As we get into we're finishing up here the first show, everybody. We got a couple minutes left here, but I think we're going to do a second recording. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Another half hour to dig into the depth a little bit more because you specialize in life insurance and health insurance. And they are both regarding your life, one being the health part of it. And I have an expert who I've dealt with for years, and he's a great guy. I just met Terrell. Maybe I'm going to bounce some ideas off him. Is my guy doing all right? Am I doing all right? And you would probably say yes or no, and go back and ask him if he would change that for you. Or if he doesn't, then...
What's really funny? The number of times I've given people advice to take back to their broker, because... They're like, oh, I really like him. And I'm like, all right, well, tell him to do this. Whereas, I was joking with a lady one day. I said, if your doctor was doing this wrong, would you go back to him after getting a better second opinion? And she's like, I got to think about that. And I was like, but I don't like to. I like to share with other brokers because I feel like there's more than enough business to go around. But if I can help you in a short conversation and I can send that information back, fine. And, I really do feel like what you put out into the world comes back, So being a person of good energy and high integrity, it'll come back around.
Write that one down in the universe. Whatever you put out there does come back. And think about that from a logical perspective, because if you're talking trash, we all talk trash to our buddies and shooting whatever's going on. But when it talks to business and you're out there in the real world, even if something bad happened to you, you kind of bounce back, man, I feel sorry. Whoever it was that might have instigated that bad thing, because that's going to come back on them.
Yeah.
And you don't want that to happen. Now, my guy, I won't say his name out loud because but I did show you my friends who was my broker. I said, here's what we did. You like this idea? And you're like, that looks good. And I just want to help everybody too. And there's plenty to go around. But I can tell by the way you handle your business, you've obviously done pretty well. And that means that you've helped a lot of people. Because if you work hard, you do well to make good for people. That's what brings it to you. Not taking advantage and manipulating. And people that do that, I don't understand it. Some people do it that way. It comes back on them. Great point you make there, and that's true of life. So with that, well, we just ran over by just a minute there, but stay tuned for more, everybody, for that second half hour. We're going to come up here in just a minute, and we'll be diving into that life and health and how important those two components are. And they're separate, but they obviously have a lot to do with each individual.
Oh, yeah, offense and defense.
Offense and defense. I like it. Good stuff.